Seveso, Italy was the scene of the world's worst dioxin accident. Minamata, Japan taught us the crippling truth about mercury poisoning. Two other words from closer to home have come to symbolize the dangers that lurk in our toxic garbage: Love Canal. When the story of Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York was officially over, we decided that the important story was probably just beginning. It seemed likely that Love Canal was only a hint of more poisonous danger that lay buried across the Niagara River. It turned out, sadly enough, that we were right. The famous falls, one of the 7 wonders of the world. For millions of tourists, and they come from all over the world, the falls are a spectacular symbol of rugged country with deep gorges and pure rushing water. Of course, the phenomena are not all natural. Niagara Falls, Ontario is a garish tourist town, and visitors account for 1/3 of its income.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Niagara Falls.
Most of the action is on the Canadian side, and here it's not all neon. There are splendid parks and historic drives. But across the river in Niagara Falls, New York, it's a different story. Instead of exploiting the beauty of the falls, the American city took the hydropower and used it to help build one of the biggest chemical complexes in North America. Now there are fears that this city of 75,000 people may be one of the most dangerously contaminated on the continent.
Once we were known as the honeymoon city of the world. Now we are known as a chemical dump.
It's going to hurt me. It's going to kill me. I don't want this to happen.
When I see my men getting sick and getting burnt and winding up in the hospital and dying of cancer, you don't know what this stuff is going to do in another 10 or 15 years. All this stuff mixed together, you might be sitting on another atomic bomb, wipe out this whole damn city.
Buffalo Avenue runs along the Niagara River upstream from the falls. It's the home of giant chemical companies like Carborundum, Olin, DuPont, and finally, Hooker Chemicals and Plastics, a division of Occidental Petroleum in Los Angeles. Built in the early 20s, the Hooker plant produces chemicals that go into products all around us: plastic cups, seat covers, bleaches, dry cleaning solvents, toys. We can't imagine living without these products, but at the same time, some people here can't imagine living any longer with the chemical wastes left over from the manufacturing. For years, they had no choice. There were virtually no controls on disposal of poisonous wastes. The companies dumped them wherever they could find a pit, and one of the biggest was this half-mile ditch dug as the start of an ill-fated shipping canal. The builder was William Love, and eventually his name was known around the world, thanks to Hooker Chemical. Hooker began dumping chemicals into the canal in the 40s, and 10 years later, when it was full of hundreds of different chemical byproducts, the company covered it over with dirt. Eventually, the school board wanted the land, and Hooker gave it away, reluctantly, the company says now. A school was built on the edge of the canal, and a new community grew up around it. The houses were modest, but it was a pleasant enough place to live, until pools of chemical goo began bubbling up in backyards and oozing into basements. Lois Gibbs suspected something terribly wrong soon after she moved to Love Canal. Her children developed epilepsy, ear and liver problems, and a rare blood disease. She blamed it on what was buried beneath the school playground.
When I went door to door to talk to people, originally just to close down the school, I found many severe health problems in these people that made me very sick. I mean, little children were crippled with arthritis, bone diseases, blood problems, miscarriages, birth defects, crib deaths. I mean, you imagine anything, and it was here. And they all thought it was normal. Nobody thought that the problem was related to anything because everybody else's kids were sick and were hospitalized and going under surgery.
This is what's left after the Battle of Love Canal. People like Lois Gibbs were stuck. They couldn't afford to leave because no one would buy their homes. Finally, under tremendous pressure, the state and federal governments put up money to buy out 700 families in a 10-block area. Although the state's latest report says there still isn't absolute proof that the chemicals were to blame, governments have spent over $50 million here, And now Washington and New York State are suing Hooker Chemical for compensation.
Virtually 90% of the population has been affected in some way. An example is one street, there's 12 homes, 8 of them have cancers. The last 15 pregnancies between January 79 and January 80, we've had 2 normal births. What the total is, I don't know, but it's astronomical, and it's very frightening.
What do you think Love Canal has done to this town?
Most of the people who lived here and lived in the other places are not going to relocate in the city, but go into an outer area where they feel safe.
But surely not all of Niagara Falls is like the Love Canal.
Well, a good portion of it is, in fact, like Love Canal because we have so many dumps in the city of Niagara Falls as well as the town of Niagara.
Lois Gibbs is right. Last year, a New York State task force found 107 hazardous waste dumps in Niagara County, containing some of the most deadly poisons known to man. Dr. Beverly Pagan at the Roswell Park Cancer Center in Buffalo was one of the first scientists to study the people around Love Canal.
And I think that's what these dump sites are, time bombs. The ones that have toxic chemicals are generally in the urban area. You see, when we went to bury our household garbage, we went way out in the country. People didn't like the smell, the rats, but toxic chemicals got put in 55-gallon drums, got buried right here, and then houses built right on top of it, right next to it. So we have some severe problems.
Are there any other dumps as bad as Love Canal?
Well, Hyde Park, of course, really was more severe than Love Canal in terms of its exposure to people.
Hooker's Hyde Park dump is in an industrial area across town from Love Canal. From the air, it looks like a triangular piece of parkland because 3 years ago the company was forced to cover it over. But underneath the cap, there's 4 times more chemical waste than in Love Canal. One scientist claims there's more of the fearsome poison dioxin in here than in any single dump anywhere else in the world. Ernie Lewis worked in a ceramics factory beside the dump.
Never had so much problems in the entire lifetime that I was here until Hooker started dumping their shit over here. And like I say, when they backed their trucks up into the place there, before it even got to the pit, these guys start dumping and the drums would come down, they'd bust open. Whichever way the wind blew, that's the way the stuff went. Guys were getting burnt. They did, what am I burning from? What am I burning from? What am I burning from?
This was solid stuff, dust in the drums.
Dust, very fine dust. If the wind blew toward the plant, the guys would get sick in the plant. Some would be bleeding from the nose and the mouth, some had hemorrhage right there. And you just had a hell of a mess.
Dennis Virtuoso and Larry Millette worked in a barrel factory on the other side of the dump. They were both active union men, and they complained about health conditions.
We found out that we had a lot of illnesses. We searched back in our plant, and we found out we had, every year for the last 8 years, we had someone dying of cancer. We found out we had like 20 cases of emphysema. We had about 15 cases of skin rashes. Now, this is out of 60 people. We also found out that a lot of guys had cysts, you know, and urinary tract infections, and this is stuff that that causes, you know, it's caused by toxic chemicals.
Armed with this information, Virtuoso and Millette asked the federal agency in charge of occupational health and safety, NIOSH it's called, to check out the factory. NIOSH found poisons all right, and it's still studying the effect on health.
They found Myrix, which is banned right now, which is in Lake Ontario, which originated from this dump. On the rafters, PCBs, and a few other chemicals inside the plant.
Yeah. And this is presumably a clean factory.
Right,
yes.
right.
So there's no chemicals.
No, we
And
don't
I want
make
to
any
add,
chemicals.
85% of the drums here go to Hooker Chemical.
Yeah. Well, because that's when we first started all this, I was approached by the manager of industrial relations, and he told me, he says, "You know what you're doing?" I says, "Yeah, I know what I'm doing." He says, "You know, this is your livelihood, isn't it?" I says, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, you sure you know what you're doing?" I says, "Yeah." I says, "People's health is more important to me than anything, you know." And he says, "Well, okay, you know." He says, "You know, Hooker's our biggest customer." I said, "Hey, I don't care. You know, to me, it's more important. People's health is more important than any customer of ours."
You must have been scared.
I was very scared. I still am, because when we were at a meeting with NIOSH officials, I asked them, I said, "You know, now that we're out of here, and are we safe?" He says, "No." He says, "Sometimes it takes 20 years for these effects to show up in your
What could
body."
happen to you?
Cancer. That's what I'm scared of. Because my father-in-law worked here for 30 years, and he just had his cancer in his throat.
What about you? What happened to you? Why are you at, what, 57, not still working there?
Well, I have heart trouble. I have liver trouble. I got some crap in my eyes that developed an ulcer in the eye.
But the fear goes beyond the factories around Hyde Park. There's a stream that flows underground beneath the dump and eventually winds its way into the Niagara River half a mile away. It's called Bloody Run.
And when the tankers come in, they just opened up their big valves and let the damn stuff run, and it run right into Bloody Run Creek.
The chemicals were flowing all through here. Red, blue, green. And these are natural historical drains come right through here. And they put a dump here.
Who do you blame for this?
There's only one person to blame. That's Hooker Chemical.
Bruce Davis of Houston is head of Hooker Chemical in Niagara Falls.
Whether or not there is chemical migration in the bedrock, at this point in time, there's totally insufficient evidence as to whether there's any chemical migration and where it's going, if it's going anywhere at all, and if it's a reason for concern.
They certainly found chemicals in the factories around.
Well, that has nothing at all to do, first of all, with material getting out through the bottom of the landfill site.
If it comes out through the top.
Well, if it comes out in the ambient air, then the question becomes one of where did it come from?
PCBs causes cancer.
Yeah, where's PCBs?
Dust.
Where do you find PCBs around here? It's got to come from that dump. Where do you find Mirex around here? It's got to come from that dump. And here it's right in the rafters in the plant, the dust.
It's a moot question as to whether the dioxin in those facilities was caused by the landfill site or was caused just by normal incineration, which created a dioxin and made it airborne and got into those facilities.
Which had nothing to do with Hooker.
Had nothing at all to do with our landfill site.
But why would it simply be around your dumps then? Why wouldn't it be all over Niagara Falls?
Well, they didn't check all over Niagara Falls. They only checked the buildings around the dump site.
So it might have been the whole town.
Yeah, and and the question is dioxin...
That must give you some cause to worry.
No, it doesn't. If dioxin is a natural product of incineration.
That's a theory put forward by some chemical companies. But in terms of significant amounts of dioxin, most scientists reject it. So does this man, Fred Armagost. On its way down to the Niagara River, Bloody Run Creek runs above ground through his backyard.
I've got two daughters that was here when they was pregnant that lost babies between 3 and 4 months. I've got a lot of grandchildren that's got respiratory problems. That was when their mothers was pregnant, they was living with us. My oldest grandson, he was here. He lived here till last November. He's 6 now. He's got respiratory problems. He's got tooth problems. He's got one kidney that's down in his hip area. It's only about half size.
Why haven't you moved out long ago? Why do you keep living here?
It's pretty hard to move if the way things are, if you're not financially able to just go out and buy a house.
You're stuck here?
Yeah.
You scared living here?
I probably am not any more scared than I am mad. I've bitched about this thing for years, and I've been lied to for years, and I think that makes things worse than if I'd have been told the truth, and probably at one time I could have moved.
Bloody Run. Is that potentially a worse problem than Love Canal?
No, we don't think so. We think we know exactly what the nature of the problem is there.
What is it? What can you do about it?
We think we are reaching a conclusion, a satisfactory conclusion, which will allow us to implement a remedial program to ensure the basic integrity of that landfill site.
Make it secure. Keep the stuff in.
Absolutely secure. More secure. It's secure now, but would in fact even provide more security, more assurance.
It's impossible. How are you going to clean that thing up? It's polluting the river, Lake Ontario. It's so bad.
That's why I think the Canadian people should really
get more into it.
Get more into it too, because that thing there is polluting your lake, Lake Ontario.
Under pressure from the New York State authorities, Hooker built collection ditches around both the Hyde Park and Love Canal dumps to catch any chemicals oozing out. The next problem was getting rid of the leachate draining into the ditches, because it contained, among other things, dioxin. The dangers in dioxin are truly mind-boggling. It's 1,000,000 times worse than thalidomide. 1/200th of a drop can kill a man. 30 gallons could destroy all human life. Nevertheless, Hooker took leachate from the contaminated dumps and burned it in this incinerator.
One of the things you did with your incinerator, and this was completely within the regulations, was to burn the leachate from Hyde Park and Love Canal in it, and that contained dioxin. Do you think that was a good idea?
Well, how do you know that the leachate that we burned in that incinerator contained dioxin?
Do you know that it didn't contain dioxin?
Now, you're accusing me of having burned
I'm saying
something
there was dioxin in both those dumps. Leachate from those dumps went into the incinerator.
First of all, let me tell you that dioxin is a very insoluble chemical and won't get in water. And so it's almost impossible to have found any dioxin in any of the leachate because it's highly water. All right, so that there's no evidence that there's any dioxin in any leachate that was disposed of.
That's not what the regional head of New York's Environment Department thinks. John Spagnoli reluctantly authorized the burning because he didn't know what else to do with the leachate, and he admits that both he and Hooker knew it contained dioxin.
And yes, we were aware of the presence of dioxin, and this information was part of the decision process in the final decision on the burn.
The Hooker incinerator was built in 1961, and although the company insists it's adequate, other experts say the new killer chemicals like dioxin and C56 aren't held in the burn chamber long enough to be destroyed.
The incinerator at Hooker Chemical is not built for that. You have to really have a specially constructed incinerator. To take leachate from Hyde Park and put it into the Hooker incinerator is unbelievable.
Why unbelievable?
Well, they've taken some toxic chemicals which were affecting a small number of people, and by putting it in an incinerator where some of it can come out the smokestack, they're spreading it to where it can affect hundreds or thousands of people.
If you said to me now, one of the alternatives is don't build a collection system and allow the leachate to stay within the same constraint, then I would say, fine, let's leave it be. But once I've built that leachate system, I'm committed to handling that leachate. Once committed to handling it, before I let it run into the river, I'll destroy it.
Meanwhile, in Albany, the state capital, the burning of leachate from Love Canal and Hyde Park horrified people in the state health department. Dr. Stephen Kim, the state's chief toxicologist, wanted it stopped.
When you look at from the point of view of the absolute number of pounds per hour that might release, say 5-10 pounds per hour, it could very well be of concern because you don't know what it is. It may not all be dioxin. A lot of it may be dioxin. It might be something else that we've never, that we haven't ever documented before.
Beyond the leachate, Dr. Kim and other experts are now worried that the exotic compounds being burned in the incinerator every day are within the chamber, combining to make new poisons and new dioxins which are being carried over the whole community.
When you have a lot of substances running around in this combustion chamber, it's possible for you to form other compounds that you possibly didn't have originally. Like dioxin, it certainly is possible to form 2,3,7,8 tetrachloro-dibenzodioxin specifically, and other dioxins.
Dangerous levels of dioxin are still so minute that scientists have trouble detecting it in people. It's easier to find it in birds, and indeed Environment Canada is finding the poison in seagull eggs all around Lake Ontario, even on the Canadian shore, more than 100 miles from Niagara Falls. They say the quantities are high enough that they must have come from a production source, and the only one they can identify near Lake Ontario is Hooker Chemical.
We haven't found any evidence of dioxin.
Okay, that stack is, to the best of your knowledge, completely clean.
Yes.
In terms of what comes out of it.
Yes.
But that's somewhat surprising, Mr. Davis, because your own people, in a document prepared back in 1975, it was called, I think, Operation Bootstrap, talked about the incinerator. They said it was a problem area, there's difficulties in monitoring, and a large unanswered question remains regarding the extent to which we will use the residue burner in the future.
We don't have any problems at all with that incinerator at the present time. It's operating in complete conformance to our procedures. It's operating in complete conformance to our environmental regulations. It's operating satisfactorily without any emissions.
But what's changed then? In 75, your own report found that there were big difficulties with the incinerator.
Our own report, which you quote, which, by the way, I might add, I didn't realize was going to be part of this discussion, and I don't necessarily concur that you're acting very ethically in discussing this subject when it wasn't on a list of subjects to be discussed.
Well, we're talking about incineration, and the best sources we can find are your own company documents, Mr. Davis.
Well, fine.
And your own scientists' evaluation of them.
I'm telling you exactly what the situation is. the situation is such that that was an internal audit that we made on any area where we might have a potential problem so that we could address that problem to ensure that we were operating in conformance to all regulations and all requirements by state and federal authorities.
Apart from a thorough check of the incinerator every 3 years and a state inspection every 6 months, it's left to Hooker's own scientists working in this lab to make sure that the company is complying with emission regulations. Union activist Jeannie Riley worked in the product testing end of the Hooker labs for 12 years, and she says the procedures she used there are applied throughout.
Can you rely on those emissions tests that come out of the lab?
In a one-word answer, no. And I've been present when individuals have said that they are not signing test results because they don't want to go to jail for this corporation. And they are to the point where they are extremely frustrated that they have a requirement to produce results and they are not confident that these results are accurate.
Although Riley was not personally involved in emissions tests, she says the same procedures apply in that lab. We confirmed that with a present employee involved in emissions testing who told us that the repeating of tests continues today.
Is an emissions test that's done by Hooker going to be accurate? Do they go in and do one test? Here's what it reads, let the chips fall where they may?
No, Hooker, they would like to repeat tests and they like to report tests that are within specifications. So if they have a sample that comes up and is out of spec, then that sample will be continually retested and
So
they will go for another sample.
So they keep doing it until they get it within the limits.
Right.
We believe we have a certain social and corporate responsibility to fulfill, and we expect to fulfill that.
But we've talked to people in your labs who've told us that when they do the monitoring, they're asked to repeat tests over and over again until they get a result that falls within the legal limit. If the first test don't, they'll just keep doing it again.
Well, I don't know who you've spoken to and who your authorities are that you say are within our laboratories. I'm not aware of any such practice. We don't operate that way. That's not in accordance with corporate policy, and I doubt that very much.
Compliance or not, New York State is now suing Hooker Chemical for $600 million because of its past waste disposal practices. And Hooker is not the only company here that's been in court. Olin has been convicted for pouring pure mercury into the Niagara River and then falsifying its records. Carborundum has been convicted several times for violating air emission standards. Airco Spear has had government inspectors in its plant for a full year listing health and safety violations. DuPont is suspected of spilling PCBs into the river and is now paying the dredging costs to get them out. Lee Smith is the executive director of the union-funded Western New York Council on Occupational Safety and Health.
We've done studies, informal studies, among the unions that belong to our organization that show, for example, 300% elevated risk of stomach cancer. Now, stomach cancer is generally thought to be an environmentally induced cancer. In another instance at Allied Chemical, they did some work on the people who were making blue jean dye. Benzidine, it's called. And they discovered 51 instances of bladder cancer.
In one plant?
Yeah, over a period of years.
Most of the companies have improved safety conditions, but the unions are still not satisfied. Hooker employees were on strike this fall, and one of the main issues, ahead of money, was safety. One of the first steps to protect the community would be the installation of the most modern chemical incinerators, and they cost up to $20 million each. But the companies are not rushing out to build them, and in fact, there are signs that in some ways pollution in Niagara Falls is getting worse. The city recently spent $61 million for a new sewage treatment plant, complete with the most sophisticated carbon beds to treat industrial sewage. But within months, all the caustic factory waste had eaten through the steel and concrete supports. This part of the treatment plant is no longer being used. And now, 40 million gallons a day of the stuff that destroyed it is being dumped only partially treated into the Niagara River above the falls. Canadian authorities are appalled. Further along Buffalo Avenue is the city's water treatment plant. It's right next to another of Hooker's old dumps. And like Hyde Park and Love Canal, this one's leaking too. The drinking water is so contaminated that powdered carbon must be added to remove pollutants. And despite this, a new federal study indicates the water in this city is still a potential health hazard. The state is trying to get better disposal systems throughout the area, and over local opposition, it's supporting expansion of a huge private dump near Lewiston, a beautiful historic town a few kilometers north of Niagara Falls. Wastes are already being trucked in from all over the northeastern U.S. to the dump owned and operated by SCA Chemical Waste Services. SCA wants to expand, and both American and Canadian governments prefer that waste come here instead of being dumped into sewers or ditches. The expanded site will have 3 full-time New York State inspectors and even Canadian inspectors who will check the discharges of treated wastes, up to 1 million gallons a day. It will flow through this pipeline into the Niagara River and Lake Ontario. But instead of seeing it as a solution, Lewiston residents fear the SCA site is another waste problem. They don't want to have to deal with other people's garbage, and they don't believe the promises.
I don't trust the company, and I don't trust the regulatory agencies based on 7 years of history with them.
Cal Schultz is the Lewiston town engineer. He's caught SCA pouring toxic wastes right into sewer lines, and at one point ordered all the lines around the dump cemented shut. But that didn't stop the dumping.
They had a hose leading from one of the facultative ponds, these holding ponds, into one of the sewer lines, and the 4 Mile Creek turned black all the way to Lake Ontario.
Schultz complained to the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the dumping was finally investigated. But SCA got off with a $1,000 fine, and the incident was explained away as an accidental rupture caused by a bulldozer.
Now, I says, but Commissioner, I said, you know that this is a direct violation when you have a hose. It wasn't a bulldozer, there wasn't anyone in sight.
It was very deliberate.
Yeah, he says, well, we couldn't get him to plead guilty to that. These are only times when, by accident, that we happen to find them. Now, how many times discharges have gone undetected is anyone's guess.
If they seem too skeptical, perhaps it's because SCA isn't the only problem for people in Lewiston. Right next to the dump, there's a concrete silo full of radioactive wastes. Wastes from the Manhattan Project, which produced the atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan. Federal Energy Department tests show that the silo is leaking, and radiation is leaving the site.
There is an opening in the top of the silo, and one of the grab samples indicated 117,000 picocuries per liter. 3 is considered an action level at a fence line.
Joan Jipp, a Lewiston town councilor, is leading the fight to have the radioactive wastes removed from the area.
It is leaching, we know, into the drainage ditches, which ultimately reach Lake Ontario. There is a strong possibility of subsurface migration through the sand and gravel lenses that exist under the site.
Beyond the radioactive wastes, military records show that this site and parts of the SCA land were also used to bury TNT, nerve gas, and other deadly chemicals. It's a volatile area, and people here worry what could happen with fires like the one this year which destroyed this chemical plant a mile down the road. Councillor Jipp says the federal government agreed at one time to remove the radioactive wastes by 1983, but the policy has been changed, and now the wastes will stay put.
Perhaps moving it is as dangerous as leaving it there, and where are you going to move it to? Somebody else's town?
It is not an appropriate site due to the geological factors and the population factors. Secondly, we have had that material for 37 years. And thirdly, I don't believe anyone, even the federal government, has the right to take land and make it unusable by human beings forever. And that's what we're talking about.
Got to put the stuff somewhere.
Obviously, that's their big problem. They don't know where to take it.
How far do you live from that site and that silo with the
I live about
radiation in
4 miles directly east of it, or downwind of that facility.
Has it had any effect on you or your family?
Well, I feel it has. During the time that I lived directly across the street from it, which was a mile from the facility, my father died of emphysema. My mother died of lung cancer within a few months, and she never smoked in her life. My wife and I, when we were first married, lived at the same site, and my wife had 2 miscarriages while we were there. And over the years, I've developed a chronic renal failure. My kidneys have just quit working, and I feel that that has had a direct result of being in close contact or proximity to the radiation tower and the toxic waste.
You're on dialysis now.
Yes, I am.
This hill behind the houses is man-made. Its core is filled with chemical garbage from virtually every state in the U.S. and from Canada. It's the region's second huge dump, and this one is right inside the urban area. Seacoast International runs this site, and it too wants to expand, which again puts state officials on the spot. Imperfect as the site might be, at least the wastes are coming here instead of being dumped at night into rivers and ditches. But best alternative or not, many in Niagara Falls have had enough, and they emphatically put that to New York State's Commissioner of the Environment and Conservation, Robert Flack.
I tell you that there is no such thing as a secure landfill, sir. And you know it, and I know it. We have been the chemical toilet long enough of this country and other countries.
The taxpayer can pick up the bill, so can Seacoast. I lived in this area for a long time, all my life, okay? I spent 4 years in the service, which devoted towards the Vietnam War, okay? I fought for this country. I'm standing here now, fighting for it again.
Chemicals in the ground, chemicals in the water, chemicals in the air. These people don't know how much they've been exposed to, or even what they've been exposed to, even when it's all legal. State figures, for example, show that every year Hooker emits 6.5 tons of toxic C56, a building block in banned pesticides Kepone and Mirex.
Kepone and Mirex and dioxin are persistent in the environment. So that 6.5 tons doesn't come and then disappear, and next year you have 6.5 more tons. Every year, 6 more tons, 6 more tons. It accumulates. It not only accumulates in the environment, it accumulates in humans.
There's never been a comprehensive medical study of people in the whole area. But this much is known. Among all the states, New York has the highest cancer rate for women and the 4th highest for men. And within New York, authorities concede that cancer rates in Niagara County are in the top 10% for the state. The only broad study undertaken is one into the size of babies at birth. Although the report has yet to be released, state scientists have discovered that an abnormal number of babies born downwind from the chemical plants have low birth weights. And that could be a sign.
Low birth weight babies was an indication of health risk in Love Canal. It was one of the most sensitive indicators of health risk. They're like the early warning, the canary. It's not only that you have low birth weight babies, it's that is the signal that there is a health problem going on.
I don't know of any evidence that's been presented yet that would indicate that there's a health problem in Niagara Falls that's at all associated with the chemical industry up here.
Why do you keep living there?
I guess because this has been our homeland. My grandfather cleared that land when he first came to this country, and so I suppose this is why we like to stay here, and this is why we've been fighting the intruders, so to speak. Industry coming in, dumping this waste here.
You might have to choose between your land and your life.
Yes.
It's that bad.
It's that bad.